Hi, in this video we will cover linking clauses. So let's start. What is it? What is a clause? A clause is a series of words that contain a subject, usually, and a conjugated verb, always. There are two main types of clauses. Number one, an independent clause can stand on its own as a complete sentence. Dolores went to the grocery store. This independent clause has a subject, Dolores, and a verb, went, and makes sense on its own as a complete thought. Number two, a dependent clause must be linked to an independent clause, right? Where she bought eggs and milk. This dependent clause has a subject, she, and a verb bought, but it wouldn't make sense on its own to create a complete sentence, right? So to create a complete sentence, this clause would need to be linked to an independent clause. Dolores went to the grocery store where she bought eggs and milk. Now, clauses are commonly linked in the following ways. Number one, independent clause plus comma plus coordinating conjunction plus independent clause. We've already covered this. So Dolores went to the grocery store, comma, and she bought eggs and milk. Explanation. So when we have two independent clauses, they can be linked by a comma, but you have to use a comma with a coordinating conjunction. Remember, only the fan voice for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so can serve as coordinating conjunctions. Number two, dependent clause plus comma plus independent clause. Since she needed eggs and milk, comma, Dolores went to the grocery store. The inclusion of subordinating conjunction since makes the first clause dependent. All right. So if you want to link dependent and independent clause together, you can use a comma. Number three, independent clause plus subordinating conjunction plus independent clause. All right, so Dolores went to the grocery store because she needed eggs and milk. Okay, so here we have an independent clause, which is she needed eggs and milk, appropriately linked to another independent clause, Dolores went to the store, by a subordinating conjunction because. Whenever you're using because, you should not use a comma before it, all right? And don't worry about other subordinating conjunction, just remember because in your mind. Number four, independent clause plus semicolon plus independent clause. We've already covered this before. Dolores went to the grocery store, semicolon, she bought eggs and milk. Number five, independent clause plus comma plus relative pronoun plus independent clause. All right. So Dolores went to the grocery store where she bought eggs and milk. Now here we have an independent clause appropriately linked to another independent clause by a comma and a relative pronoun where. Alright, so we can do this as well. Okay, so on your official SAT, you're likely to see 2 to 3 questions that underline the point where two clauses meet. You may even be asked to link clauses from separate sentences. For instance, which choice most effectively combines the sentences at the underlined portion? Your job will be to link the clauses logically and grammatically by using an appropriate combination of punctuation and conjunctions. Number one, look out for comma splice errors. So a comma splice error is created when two independent clauses are linked by only a comma. This is the most common error we'll see when linking clauses on the SAT. Remember, if both clauses can stand on their own as sentences, a comma isn't enough. If you see a comma splice error, you can fix it by adding conjunction like one of the fanboys or changing the comma into a semicolon or a period. Okay, so many critics argue that Star Wars isn't science fiction, comma, they instead categorize the franchise as fantasy. All right, so these are two independent clauses. You can either change the comma into semicolon or add a fanboy's conjunction after the comma. In this case, it is so. Number two, pick logical conjunctions. So while all conjunctions can link clauses, only some conjunctions will make sense in the context of the passage. Make sure you consider the meaning of the conjunctions while selecting the most logical way to link them. Donuts made with yeast are light and fluffy, comma, so those made with baking powder are denser and more cake-like. Here the so doesn't really make sense. We can use another conjunction. Donuts made with yeast are light and fluffy, comma, while those made with baking powder are denser and more cake-like. Number three, avoid double linking clauses. We only need to link clauses once, so we should avoid using multiple conjunctions and using a conjunction alongside a semicolon. If we link clauses more than once, we'll create redundancy errors. Okay, so incorrect sentences: while the violin and the mandolin are tuned in the same way, comma, but only the mandolin has frets on its fingerboard. Now, yeah, either there are two conjunctions that are being used. There is while, there is but. All right. As we have studied previously, if you want to join two independent clauses, we can use one comma plus a conjunction, not two conjunctions. All right. So there are two versions in which this can be corrected. The violin and the mandolin are tuned in the same way, comma, but only the mandolin has frets on its fingerboard. In this case, we've taken out the while. All right. Or we can say, while the violin and mandolin are tuned in the same way, only the mandolin has frets on its fingerboard. Here, we have turned the first clause into a dependent clause by adding a conjunction in the beginning. So we can join the dependent and independent clause by just a comma. Okay, top tip number four, test semicolons using before and after test. I think we've covered this before, but let's see it again. Before you select any answer that employs a semicolon, make sure there is an independent clause on both sides of the semicolon. If the clauses before and after the semicolon can't both stand on its own as sentences, a semicolon cannot be used. Okay, though they have been portrayed in popular culture as bitter rivals, semicolon, Antonio and Wolfgang Mozart were more likely friends and respected colleagues. Alright, so here we have two clauses. The second clause is independent clause, but the first clause is a dependent clause because on its own it does not give us any meaning. The correct version would be that we use comma instead of a semicolon to join these two clauses together. Okay, so let's look at a practice question. It is tempting to glamorize the hunt for dinosaur fossils. Period. The majority of field work is characterized by the daily routine of heat, insects, and tedious labor. Which choice most effectively combines the sentences at the underlined portion? Okay, so we have two independent clauses here, and one of the ways that we can combine independent clauses or link independent clauses is by using a comma plus a fanboy's conjunction. All right. If we look at the options, option number D satisfies that condition. We have a comma plus a fanboy's conjunction. So the correct option is D. Now, this is how we tackle linking clauses in the SAT reading test. This is the end of the question guide section and the grammar subsection. And I'll see you in the next video with another topic.